Welcome to this presentation by the Oregon Teacher Standards and Practices Commission. This presentation offers information from both a state and national perspective on one of the most serious forms of educator misconduct, educator sexual misconduct with a student. In addition to reviewing Oregon Revised Statute on the topic for some state perspective, this presentation will also present information from national publications which offer insight into how educators may recognize the warning signs of sexual conduct in schools and methods to prevent such conduct. In this presentation, you may notice the term sexual conduct being used in some contexts and the term sexual misconduct being used in other contexts, and you may wonder why that is. In 2019, the Oregon State Legislature passed Senate Bill 155. The bill created a statutory definition for what is labeled as educator sexual conduct. Most national resources refer to the same educator actions as sexual misconduct. So while both terms mean basically the same thing, you may note that this presentation tends to use the term sexual conduct when discussing Oregon-specific matters. But when discussing the national data and research, the term sexual misconduct is used in order to match the language of the respective studies. So what actions are encompassed by the term educator sexual conduct? In Oregon, educator sexual conduct is defined by Oregon Revised Statute 339.370, paragraph 11. The broad language used in the Oregon statute is purposeful and meant to encompass the types of actions one would associate with the term. Such actions include, but may not be limited to, physical sexual contact with a student, sexual or sexualized verbal or electronic communications with a student, or sharing pornography with a student. Before exploring some specific warning signs and behavior patterns typical of educator sexual misconduct, let's look at some national data in order to bring some context to this discussion. In her 2013 article entitled "Know the Warning Signs of Educator Sexual Misconduct," author Carol Shakeshaft offers national statistical data on the frequency of educator sexual misconduct in America. 7% of students between 8th grade and 11th grade report experiencing physical sexual contact from an adult in their school. This percentage equates to 3.5 million students nationwide. 10% of K-12 students nationwide will experience sexual misconduct by a school employee by the time they graduate from high school. If you are an educator viewing this presentation, please reflect upon your current students. This data indicates that 1 out of every 10 students in your classroom will experience sexual misconduct by a school employee before they graduate from high school. 40% of sexual misconduct reports allege a female school employee of misconduct. Finally, in 2013, only 11% of teachers say they would report the abuse of a student by a fellow teacher. These statistics paint a rather grim portrait of student safety within schools. Logically, the next question educators must ask themselves is, what can I do to help ensure the safety of my students? The first step is to gain a better understanding of the typical behavioral patterns of educators who commit acts of sexual misconduct against students. Once these patterns of behavior are better understood, they should function as warning signs for any educator who observes them occurring within their school. In the same 2013 publication, Shakeshaft discusses 2 common patterns of sexual misconduct carried out by educators. The first and most prevalent pattern of educator sexual misconduct is called the opportunistic abuser. 2/3 of all educator sexual predators fall into this pattern of behavior. Opportunistic abusers desire to be viewed by the students as one of their peers rather than one of their teachers. These abusers want to have the students view them as cool and will choose to spend social time around groups of students. These abusers want to blend in with the student population and may go so far as going to locations off school grounds to be around students as well. The educator who is an opportunistic abuser has significant professional boundary and professional judgment issues. These issues sometimes manifest themselves into the comments the educator may make about students. These abusers are more likely to make inappropriate comments about students, such as, "she's hot," or "he is sexy." The second pattern of educator sexual misconduct discussed by Shakeshaft is called the fixated abuser. This pattern of sexual misconduct is most common in elementary and middle school grades. The primary characteristic of this predatory behavior is that the abuser takes time to earn the trust of the victim prior to acting out the sexual misconduct. It is typical within this pattern of behavior that the abuser also establishes a high degree of trust and solid rapport with the professional educators within the school building, and often with the parents of the student victim. These professional relationships establish the abuser as a respected educator within the school and within the community. It is this standing within both the school and the community which these abusers then manipulate and leverage if and when allegations of sexual misconduct eventually come to the surface. Dr. Anna Salter is an internationally renowned expert on the topics of sex offenders and sexual abuse. She has numerous books and publications to her credit. During a 2012 presentation at the National Youth Protection Symposium, she reminded those in attendance exactly why fixated abusers are so difficult to stop. Dr. Salter noted that, quote, "When a fixated abuser is accused, victims protect them, parents refuse to believe the accusations, authorities discount the reports, communities support the predator, and juries acquit," end quote. Within a school setting, this often translates to school faculty and staff supporting the teacher accused of sexual misconduct and rejecting the student victim. Okay, so we've looked at Oregon statute. We have seen the national data on educator sexual misconduct, and we have learned two of the more common behavioral patterns for abusers operating in a school setting. But how do we protect our students? The most effective way to protect students from educator sexual conduct is to adopt a collective school culture which discourages sexual misconduct. Studies tell us that abusers are far less likely to carry out acts of sexual misconduct if they know they work in an environment where they are more likely to get caught, be reported to school or district leadership, and be held accountable for their actions. What does that school culture look like? Educators support students who report sexual conduct by another educator or school employee. Educators must bring these reports to the attention of school or district leadership without delay. Teachers hold other teachers accountable for the safety and well-being of the students. Most educator sexual misconduct doesn't begin and end with one singular sexual act. Most abusers, even fixated abusers, are guilty of less serious boundary violations with students leading up to the sexual act. These lesser violations may be observed by other educators, but may not always be reported to school administration. Abusers who are called out for lesser boundary violations are not as likely to escalate in their behavior to sexual misconduct with students. School administrators take all reports of sexual misconduct seriously. In Oregon, the law says all educators are mandatory reporters of sexual abuse. Be sure all required reports are made to law enforcement or the state's Department of Human Services. District leadership takes all reports of sexual misconduct seriously. Oregon law now requires that educators under investigation for sexual conduct are fully removed from the school while the investigation is underway. For further information on the topics covered in this video, please feel free to review any of the source materials. Thank you for viewing this video presentation by the Oregon Teacher Standards and Practices Commission.